I brought it from everywhere. Because he was going to sit here and kind of watch. Decided to stay down there. Is this on? Oh, a video too. Okay.
Trail. Oh, okay.
Not make everybody stand up. Just
You know what I'm saying.
Marie, Antoinette, and all that. Are we already recording?
I don't think we're on yet, are we, Jake?
We're on.
Oh, we're on?
It's-
Yeah,
it's
YouTube
red
and
up there.
Mike.
Centerville City Council is now in session for March 19th, 2019. We just finished a budget training work session as we have our budget season coming up from a representative from the League of City and Towns with some things specific to Centerville, which was good and enlightening for all of us. So let's start by making sure we have a quorum, starting down with Councilman Ince.
Bill Ince, present.
Fillmore, present.
Ivy present.
Mika present.
McEwen, present.
Let it be noted that all 5 council members are present. We will start with a prayer or thought from Councilwoman Fillmore.
I will quote Plato tonight. You can discover more about a person in an hour of play than a year of conversation. As we've been discussing the importance of our recreational facilities as of late. And I will pray. Our most gracious Father in heaven, we are thankful for the opportunity to meet tonight and do the business of the city. We're thankful to live in this land of freedom where we can govern ourselves and go through these processes and have our voices heard in this way. We are thankful for the health and safety that we enjoy here in this community and for all of those that serve us to maintain that health and safety. We're thankful for all of the citizens of this community and the wonderful spirit of friendship and service to their neighbors that we enjoy amongst one another. And we ask thee to please have thy spirit with us this evening as we do this work, and that we might enjoy wisdom in our decision making and in our respect in our conversations and make good progress in our goals. And these things we say in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So tonight's kind of a historic meeting. We have our Centerville city manager has been with us for 21 years. It is last city council meeting. We have an open house for him on March 27th from 3 to 6, but we wanted to make it a little special, so we brought in the junior high choir tonight from the Centerville Junior High, which is our only junior high in the city, and so we have Mrs. Petty and the junior high choir here tonight to take care of some of our patriotic portion of our program. So I'll turn it over to you, Mrs. Petty. Thanks for being here, everyone.
It's actually only going to be like half patriotic because we only have one patriotic acapella song. Thank you so much for the
Thank you.
Congratulations on your retirement.
Well, thank you.
Anything else we need to know, Mrs. Petty, about your choir?
We're awesome.
That says it all.
This is actually two of my choirs, my advanced and my intermediate choirs, so kind of a mixed group there. They're awesome. I love her. I'm so into Mrs. Petty.
That was great.
They did a tremendous job.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thanks for letting us work on
Didn't sound like
Okay, great. We're now at the portion of our meeting where it's the open session, and this is the opportunity where any member of the public can come up to the podium, just introduce yourself and where you're from, and just take a couple minutes to just speak about anything that's on your mind. So I now will open the open session for anyone that would like to approach.
Good evening. My name is Jake Layton. I am the new chair for the Trails Committee. And I just wanted to talk about a few thoughts that we as a committee have had. Last night we received emails of some of the draft Foothills Management Plan that we're going to be talking about tonight, or you're going to be talking about tonight. And we had some concerns about the plan. First off, that we felt like we should have been involved in the process of the draft plan. As far as we know, we were supposed to be invited to that plan, and now there's a draft and we didn't have any input whatsoever. So we were disappointed with that, and as we read through it, we disagree with a lot of what is in the draft. And so going forward, I know that we're going to be talking about having a new ad hoc committee for the final Foothills plan. We're asking that because we weren't a part of the draft, we're asking to have 2 people from our committee to be on that ad hoc committee, and to have some new citizens involved who may not have such a bias to the Foothills plan going forward. And so that's all that I had, and thank you.
Thank you, Jake. And Jake's referring to a plan that will be discussed later that will be laid out from a committee of the city that put that plan together.
Thanks, Mayor Marco Lakeschlager, Centerville resident. And I had a chance to spend some time with Corey today, who helped to assemble that plan. And you know, we learned about it yesterday, that it would be on the agenda for today, and had the chance to download it off your website and read through. And some frustrations there. We do understand we had input in the sense that we were asked for a letter, which we sent in writing, but there was no collaboration, and we were unaware that there were residents sitting on a committee, a first level committee, where we didn't have a seat. And so we're not sure how you can have, at least I didn't appreciate that. And there's a lot going on, and the process has changed a few times since this kicked off. But whether it's a communications issue or, it seems like a misunderstanding on our part. So, good faith on everybody's part. We're not saying otherwise. We're just saying that we were pretty surprised by what was contained, and maybe you've seen it in your packet and had a chance to read it. I suspect you have, and and we also understand that tonight the purpose is not to review the plan, but to talk about the ad hoc committee. So we understand the purpose. But the first, I'm just not sure how you can have even a preliminary proposed section on mountain biking without some collaborative effort by the group that spent hundreds of hours gathering information and going through an iterative process and having an open house to put that together, particularly when there are residents invited to that and there's no balanced sharing of information. So at best, what you get is a process with poor communication. And so, as I expressed to Corey today, I felt like it was a bad process and one that we didn't fully appreciate or understand. And nor were we given a copy, a courtesy copy. And again, probably just a communications issue, but that's pretty important to us. You think about the work that we've tried to do as a group of residents and as a committee, but to have to go and pull it down online and not be told that, and I understand, again, it's just ad hoc, but this emphasis on that it's just preliminary and it's not binding, it's a pretty deep hole from which to start if you read it closely. And so, if you look at what happened, our opinion on the content, we won't go into it deeply in this open session, but it misrepresents the nature of what we put together. And by the way, Corey and I I'm very confident that if we were to sit in a room with Corey and with Bruce and with Kevin and on this ad hoc committee, we could come up with something that works when it comes to erosion control and all those things. But as it stands right now, we are lumped in with the OHV users as an active use, great concerns around erosion and so forth, when that hasn't been the case on the shoreline trail. So we can disagree, and I'm not an engineer, but I do know that we took great care to work with our planner to look at side cuts and slopes and to agree to a maximum slope of 8% so that we wouldn't have those erosion problems. And yet all these concerns are coming up again, and we didn't have a chance to talk through that. And so that's why we're here in open session, just saying our ask for tonight is that with that committee, we know that we're going to be represented, but we have a lot of people that have gathered a lot of knowledge on this, and we'd like to be able to share that. And we think we ought to have at least a couple of representatives and some community members, and community members that were in the 95% support group of the 160 surveys that came forward. That's important. And we feel like, whether those two residents that were invited on the committee, whether their biases crept in or it was just the way that staff perceived it, it doesn't really matter. It's just that we feel like it misrepresents what we're trying to accomplish. And so, let's see, going forward, which is why we're here tonight, now that that's behind us, I am confident that we can work together and come up with something that works. I don't think what we have should have even come forward as a draft at this point because it lacks input. And so the last thing I would say is just kind of to revisit. I went back to my notes. We were here exactly a year ago, so March 21st of last year. And you'll remember it followed the open house where we had about 250 people. We had 160 surveys. I don't remember the survey. You have the survey results, and Jake totaled those up, but I think it was somewhere around 95% support for this, overwhelming public support from those within our community, well represented. And I can remember the goodwill expressed in that meeting by all of you, really, in saying, we want to have a process that goes forward. And so we're not going to rush this. It doesn't deserve to be rushed. We have real drainage issues and real parking issues, and for better or worse, you're caught up in all that, but we need to move forward. So there was a request by, I think it was Councilman Ince, for regular updates, at least monthly, on where we're going. And so here we are a year from now, and we're mired in a process that really hasn't gone as planned. I mean, and it's no one, so I'm not personalizing it or pointing fingers at anyone other than to say, the wheels sometimes grind slowly, but we looked at an initial plan where this ad hoc committee was to be convened in July. And for whatever practical considerations, it didn't happen. But here we are, and our concern is that it's never going to go forward because we don't have enough of a groundswell of support where it's needed. And so we would just petition you to again see what we can do to restart this process. And some sour grapes, we thought we were submitting for a grant until about the week before. And that was part of what came out of the meeting a year ago as well. Let's push through that process. And so we've stepped away from that, we've tabled that, and now we're getting to the point where we can vet this plan. And we think we're missing a real opportunity. We think it's a great treasure, and this is not a skills course as it's represented. It is a group of cross-country trails, and if given the chance to present, it's not going to be as intensive. I mean, it's pretty mild stuff. It'll grow back over if we decide, at some point we don't want it. We have parking lots in other places, but we're never going to agree. I mean, it's not constructive to go back and forth on that, but we should have some input on the ad hoc committee and see if we can get to a place where we all agree. Thanks.
Thank you. And we will be getting to that quite shortly. We just have a couple small issues for that. Another person? Great.
Hi, I'm Sunny Larson. I'm also a Centerville resident, and I'm on the Trails Committee. I'm actually a professional trail specialist, so I'm involved in this world for my professional work. And the thing that I kind of wanted to talk about tonight was just the fact that it looks like the new ad hoc committee is planning to effectively take away the mountain bike trails in the plan that we had written up. And in my mind, it seems like either there's a misunderstanding about what the trail system plan is, or there's a kind of inexplicable prejudice against the mountain bike trails, which I don't understand it. I am working on hundreds of trail projects around the country with my organization. Almost all of them that are with communities are multi-use or shared purpose trails. So they'll have mountain biking trails and hiking trails on them. Some of them will have equestrian also. And just as a side note, equestrian users actually erode trails more than mountain bikers or hikers. So I don't want to disallow them, but I'm just telling you that mountain bikes actually do not affect the environment as much as some other users do. So when we have a multi-use trail system, we often have some trails that are single direction for mountain bikes, usually downhill for mountain bikes, and that's actually just to clear congestion, and so that helps the traffic and the safety on the trail system. And I think in our plan we had one or maybe two of those downhill trails. It doesn't mean they're crazy downhill trails where bikes are going 500 miles an hour. It means it's for bikes only so that bikes and hikers don't run into each other. We had, I think we had a tot track in there, which some people might consider a skills park. Tot tracks are literally for kids who can't ride two-wheelers. They're about 50 feet long, and they're to make it a family-friendly place and to introduce kids to the outdoors. And we may have had a few bridges and what's called wooden features, like a little ramp that you go up and down. Most of these trails here would be to get kids interested, to be family-friendly. They're not for like crazy downhill bikers who would be at like a resort, like Deer Valley or something like that. Let's see. It's absolutely not dominated. The plan also is not dominated by mountain bike trails. It's mostly shared use, being used by hikers and bikers. And like I said, there's a couple of those downhill trails. All along, we've said that the trails would not cause erosion, but I feel like that message is not getting through. In the early days of trail building, trails often went straight down a hill, which is called fall line. This plan was engineered by a professional trail builder. The trails go along the side of the mountain, which is called a contour trail. The water sheets over top of the trails and rolls over the rolls that are built into the trails instead of causing erosion coming down the hill. So generally, there's actually no erosion problems with professionally planned and built trails. In fact, they often improve erosion problems because the water sheets instead of creating channels on the hillside. Another problem going on in that area right now is unauthorized use, like shooting and dumping. And I feel like if we have a planned area, then we can encourage positive use and family use rather than this kind of haphazard use and illegal use and dumping. And a trail system with the hiking and biking trails would be something that could do that and make a planned area rather than a haphazard area. And I don't know of any mountain bike trails in Utah or trail systems in Utah that do not allow mountain bikes. That did happen sometimes about 30 years ago. For instance, in California, they outlawed mountain bikes in some areas, but they came to understand that mountain biking was important to communities. It supports communities economically. It also benefits economically because it decreases health costs. It improves the activity and healthiness of community members. It increases community feeling, belonging, and volunteerism in communities, and it preserves open space. And I could give you a huge list of studies that we've collected over the years that show the benefits of trails in general. I said already, the system's planned to work for families and groups. It's not like an extreme place. It's also, if you have the hiking and biking, trail running, different activities at the same time, you can have your whole group or your whole family go there. One of the little kids can be on a tot track. A kid who likes biking can go on the biking trails. Parents who want to hike can hike, and everybody can be together and meet at the bottom. Let's see. Just the last couple of thoughts. The state is providing outdoor recreation grants all over the place right now because they see the economic and other benefits of these trail systems. And there's going to be competition to get these grants more and more because they're building throughout the state. Like there's projects in Richfield, Vernal, Cedar City, St. George, and even right here next door to us in North Salt Lake, they're expanding their trails. Fruit Heights just built a trail, which is just a mountain bike trail, but they're also going to expand their trails. Bountiful is expanding their trails, and it's because Utah and the surrounding areas sees the benefit of these trail systems. And I feel a little bit like if we continue to wait and debate and say that the trail systems are too crazy or loud or noisy, or I'm not sure what the objection is, that it'll be like we're the last people to say the light bulb was a good idea. I think that's, I guess my last point is just that I think that this land is already designated as a recreation area, and so I'm wondering if we can make it a recreation area that will really serve our whole population and the wants and needs of our population as were expressed. For instance, in our meeting that we had a year ago, where 95% of the people surveyed said that they approved of having the trail system with a mixed use. And I don't think we should limit that area to just a few users, or even if it's the concerns of homeowners around there. I think we can address their concerns and have a area for our community that serves everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Sonny. Any other comments or issues on the open session? Thanks for all that input. We will be having a report. Corey Snyder will be representing the group that did that report that the council saw in their packet on Friday, and have more explanation on that. So
I just wanted to make a comment and let you realize we don't get our packets until Friday night. So it's not like we have no idea what's going to be on the council until Friday night, usually around 5 o'clock. So just so you realize that we don't have those weeks in advance, and then, you know, as we can, we study them, and so sometimes that's why the information isn't out, is we just barely got it.
And that's put out there for the whole public on a Friday evening. Friday evening before any council meeting on the 1st and 3rd of Tuesday. So we'll look forward to that report. Let's.
I do have a question. Somebody brought up the issue of illegal dumping. Do we have a huge issue with illegal dumping on the hillside? I haven't noticed it. Maybe it's just.
It would depend
There's some of
on the
it.
definition of huge.
Right.
Is there a problem? Yes. I saw fresh dumping from last week, this week. Would I label it as huge? I wouldn't label it as
Well,
huge.
I don't think she used the word huge. She said illegal dumping, so I'm asking, is it a huge problem? I don't think you can have any public space that's unmonitored that doesn't have some sort of person tossing a can, or, I mean, are we talking cans? Are we talking couches? And what are we talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, all the above. Okay, fair enough.
Yes. I've been up there with the chief, and kids will set out couches up there and old stuff for their parties that they have up there. So, but great. So let's move on to the minutes, review and acceptance from the March 5th, 2019 City Council meeting. Do we have any changes to those minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept those minutes.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. We'll move to item number 2. On summary action calendar, we had 2 items on that. Item A has been struck because there were some things that needed to be worked out on the agreement further, so that will be at our next council meeting. So it's just item B, approving the purchase of the pickup for the parks, the pickup truck for the Parks Department.
Make a motion to approve item B on the summary action calendar.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. The next item is item number 3. This is an item, it's a public hearing item. This is accepting the job value and compensation schedule. This is ordinance number 2019-4. This is what the process that we've gone through. A lot of hours were put in, and we're spent time and money and commitment to come up with this that we feel is a real fair analysis of where the compensation for the positions that we have within our city sit that are fair. Steve, did you want to say anything more on that?
I don't need to say much. The process started in August with the hiring of a consultant. There's documents in the packet. There's a summary staff memo. So in light of the time, if there's questions, I'll answer questions.
We've asked and gotten a lot of answers to a lot of questions.
On page 10, in the conclusions.
This is the executive summary.
Yeah, page 10 of the executive summary. Second line of the first item. I recall quite specifically the first item that at the management level, the shortfall 8 to 29%. I don't remember the 18% on the general staff being in there.
I don't either.
Where does it say, Jake?
Under the first summary conclusions.
I think it's talking about a range, isn't it, from 2 to 18%?
0.2 to 18.
But the average was between 5 and 6%. So you had a few that were quite a bit more, but on average, it was 5 to 6%.
Were the 18, was the outlier law enforcement?
No, you're talking about non-management positions, right?
I thought the outliers were the couple of jobs that we didn't have anybody currently serving in position.
Sorry, it doesn't come to mind right now, Councilman.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Second item, the first, second, third, and fourth quartile summary. I'd still like to see something that showed us where individual salaries were on that schedule. And I don't think we've ever gotten it.
Like by person?
Ranking?
No, by position.
Yeah. Or position, yeah, that makes sense.
By position, I'm
You
not
have
trying to-
in the,
I mean, unfortunately, there's a pretty direct correlation in many instances, but
in the multi-tab document that you received in an earlier meeting, there's one of those tabs that gives you what's called a compa ratio, a column that says compa ratio. And if it's 100% in the compa ratio, that means the employee's current salary is right at the, what we were calling the control, or whatever other name we come up with, the midpoint, which is not really the midpoint. But,
which was a 60th percent.
and if it's less than 100%, then it's below that by, and you can get a ratio there. If it's 100 and something percent, that means it's above that point. Would that tell you what you need to know if you were to look at that column?
Yeah, it probably would.
We did talk about it last
We
time
did
in our
talk
meeting.
about it in the
I
meeting.
wanted to look at the two side by side.
But I thought we were going to get something in
Well,
addition.
Well,
I thought there was another line
in the
item
compensation
column that
study.
that showed actual compensation in that
Yeah, it
position.
does, in the least cost
Yeah,
implementation.
Our
Yeah.
But-
actual salaries are there.
But you're looking, let me reinterpret this, Bill. So you're looking at, if we looked at everyone's name, you'd say this person is in the third quartile, this person's in the fourth quartile as far as where they are in pay range
No,
relative
well,
to
you-
salary, or?
It wouldn't be by name, it would be by
Well,
position.
by position. This position
Yeah.
is currently funded at third or fourth quartile.
Well, the absolute number would say, for example, I'll come down and use a sergeant. Say we have, the average on sergeants is $63,000. Then I can look at it and say, okay, $63,000 puts all of my sergeants in the first quartile.
Upper end.
Upper end of first quartile, but first quartile. Or if that number were
And in reality,
$7,000, then I'm fourth quartile.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just trying to dumb it down a little bit so I don't have to look so many places to try to understand it.
My question for tonight, though, is what we have on the agenda is to approve the ordinance. And so I don't disagree that having that information easily accessible would be great. Is it going to change your position? Are you ready tonight or not to move forward and adopt this ordinance after all this work that we've put in, or do we need more time?
I'm probably ready, but I'd like more time.
I'm with you on that
Well,
one.
it's been since August.
It's been since August, we spent a ton of time on
Ton
it.
of time.
I'd like,
Well, Bill, I would suggest, why don't you come to my office, we can sit down and I can go through all 20 tabs with you, and you can go over and we can dissect it, and I can show you the stuff that really we don't show the public.
And do you want to see that before you're ready to vote? So would you like us to table this tonight?
I'm not going to ask to table it. I'll come see you tomorrow before my 4:30 meeting.
Staff, do you see any harm in tabling it?
I think there is some harm from a timing standpoint in tabling it.
Okay.
We'd agreed that we needed to get it going.
And let's finish this with Steve here at the dais with us, since he's put in all
I
this
agree.
work.
So I'm not asking to table it, but I'd like to see that additional level of information.
Well, then, I'm going to just jump out on a limb and say motion that we approve
Yeah.
ordinance 2019-04.
I think
and
we have to
adopting the schedule.
We need a public
Public
hearing,
That's right,
though.
we do need a
Public hearing on it.
I'm telegraphing my intent for later on. Since we do need to continue debate.
Okay. Obviously, this one has no applicants, so this is a public hearing matter. So on this matter alone, the public hearing is now open for any member of the public. If no comments from the public, then I will close the public hearing, and I'm ready to entertain a motion, Councilman McEwen.
So I will apologize to the public for jumping ahead. I rarely do that, so I feel properly chastised for that. But I'm going to go ahead and motion that we approve ordinance 2019-03, or is it 04?
04.
Okay, it's listed as 03 in the,
Is it, well,
It's 04. It is 04.
is it?
yeah, it's 04.
It is.
It's
04 at the
in the
top,
agenda
and
as
it
03, it's
shows
04 on the
03
ordinance
at the
itself. So motion to approve ordinance 2019-04, amending and adopting the Centerville City Job Value and Compensation Schedule as presented.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? If no further discussion,
I'm still not 100% settled on it, but there's nothing I can do to make it more settled, so.
100% is a very high expectation level.
I was really hoping for
There are very
100%.
few things I get 100%.
Are you 90%? I mean, what's the concern that you have that's unsettled at this point?
I don't know, I guess it was brought up partly in our work session about our priorities and what we have said our priorities are and how the funding compares to what the priorities are. And I'm sure that they align, but that's all. We've gone to a ton of work, and it's a good step forward.
I think that, too, what I would say is that this gives us the data, which is the foundational layer, to then make policy decisions that still move actual placement within this bed of data, is what I would say. So there's still plenty of room in our budget process and in our process of raises and where and how we place.
I feel like it ties our hands a
people.
little bit more than we had been previously about that.
That's
Just
true,
just
but this
because
council
it-
asked for this
the
process to do
relative-
that.
Yeah, but I would also counter, Stephanie, one of the things we did is we took a model that's been around for a while. We took its assumptions, we validated some, we invalidated others, and now we have a new baseline. Like Tammy's saying, now we have a new baseline. You can move it from that, but at least if we're in agreement that this is the right way to go, that we agree with all the research that we've all done, what's been done by the consultant, and the numbers we've come back with, then we at least level set. We said, this is where we're starting from, and then we can move off of that. If we believe that the basic number or the basic model is flawed, then you wouldn't vote for this. But when we had our last work session, I asked that question. I said, is everyone in agreement that we believe this model is fundamentally sound?
Enough to move forward, I
Enough
think.
to move forward. And I wasn't sure that we were in disagreement on that.
In spite of my prior question / complaint, about 3 weeks ago, Robin and I spent the better part of 3 hours going through the details of the assessment process with Steve. And I am supportive of the baseline and the project and what's been done. And I'm going to vote for it. I'd just like to have some frosting on my cake to be able to see it a little easier.
I agree with you, Bill, in terms of from a dashboard perspective. It still requires a little bit to unwind it. I can't look at a position and say,
No, you
currently,
can't.
where are we on that? But, I mean, I can unwind, the data's there, and I as you're mentioning, Sergeant, I went and unwound just that one, but we can represent it in a different way, I think, to make it a little easier for future individuals to take a look at it.
Mayor, could I explain for the benefit of those who may be listening that this is the adoption of a pay plan that establishes pay ranges for each position, and it doesn't result in pay raises for any employees other than there's a few who are below the new minimums that when this is on the effective date, I recommend that they be brought up to the minimum.
There was 3, right?
Yeah, I think there was 4 positions.
Okay.
A total impact of $3,000 or $4,000, as I recall.
It wasn't a large number.
Wasn't a big number, so this is not guidelines governing the pay raises that employees get. That's going to come later in your budget process. This is establishing the pay ranges based on the criteria that the council agreed to and the survey population that was agreed to. And I guess that would be useful for those listening also to know that for the non-management positions, the comparative group was public entities, all public entities within the survey database for the Wasatch Front, no matter what the size of the city was. And in case of management, the survey population was cities of 10 to 30,000. The big cities were not included in that. And just for those listening.
That wasn't in the executive summary, but that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Or at least I didn't notice it when I reread the executive summary today.
I think it's in there somewhere.
It may be.
Yeah.
I didn't notice it today.
All right, if no further discussion, let's do a roll call vote, starting with Councilwoman Meekum.
Aye.
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 The motion passes 5-0. You guys all know where we can go to staff to get further information that you requested on that as well, too.
Let me just say thank you, council. It's been a long process, and I appreciate you getting it done tonight.
Thank you, staff.
Thank you. Hey, let's go to item number 4. This is our opportunity to hear from Corey Schneider, who is representing the committee that reviewed the Foothill Management Plan. He will go over that report and some of the findings of it and some suggestions. Corey?
If I may, Mayor, I think it's more focused on the ad hoc committee, but maybe you...
I am open. I mean, obviously, every time a planner creates a document, somebody's not going to be happy with it, so I'm not offended by any means. But, you know, we can talk about where we're at, what the future expectation to move forward is. We can talk about the plan and any elements with it. I can address the issues so I can at least show that it's not all done in a vacuum for the Trails Committee. So I'm really, where's your wish to have the discussion?
I'd say for the sake of time, let's stick to just talking about the process.
Okay.
And forming the ad hoc, so that we can keep the process moving forward.
I think some questions will come from the process.
Okay.
That hopefully
I agree with that, but I also, if Corey, I do think it's important that it's not considered in a vacuum, because there are definitely some bent feelings. I mean, we've got this a couple of days ahead of time, but if Corey, I would like to hear what, at least from the processes, because at least the way I'm hearing it from members of the Trails Committees, they feel completely cut out of this. So if you could address where we are in the stage and how that ended up there, I think that would be appropriate to, just because if we talk about just the ad hoc committee and we don't address any of these concerns, that's, I think, works.
No, I just mean, let's talk about how the process has gone up to this point and then move it forward, rather than diving into the actual language of the draft. We don't.
Yeah, fair enough. I just want to make sure that the procedure is addressed so that the concerns are addressed.
But I agree with George as far as Corey needs to let him know how this has happened.
So for the benefit of everyone here to understand, you've summarized the process for us on some other occasions. Sounds like you summarized the process again and the process moving forward. Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Well, the process has been somewhat fluid, and so the issues of communication, I certainly think those who do not follow it on a regular basis probably didn't fully see the transitory nature of the process. Again, a year ago, it is true, we came back in April of 2018 to talk about a process. That process has not advanced according to that schedule, and I've come to the council on a couple of occasions to address the scheduling of that. We did start out with a staff review. This was internal. when we began was just to get the city staff to do an assessment of the current conditions of the property. So the metaphor I like to use is we have a redwood tree, and we got to get our arms around it, and we're not sure how we're going to get our arms around it because we have a piece of property that has some difficulties. Now that began as the council just prior that month went up to the land and walked it with a number of individuals to talk about the property. And certainly it was my impression from the field trip that the council was like, wow, this is a redwood tree and how are we going to get our arms around it? And so the technical staff did an assessment where we just did things internally with staff only. And we came up with an assessment of current conditions, and that essentially stayed on the schedule that was according to the programs to do that assessment. The step after that identified in the outline in this communication statement and concern was that we would create an ad hoc committee last summer to come up with a plan. What we discovered in that issue is we weren't really ready to begin talking about uses of the property. We weren't really ready to come up with a master plan for the property at that early date because of the number of technical concerns that were associated with it. So we had a work session with the city council. We discussed delaying that ad hoc committee, and we came up with another document to wrap our minds around it. I think we called it the strategic, we had a strategy task group. That's what we discussed in a work meeting with the council. And that, let's see, I've got a date of August 27th for that, to look at that task group. And again, that was designed for staff to take the assessment of conditions and start exploring recommendations. And a large issue that was associated with that time was talking about access to the property and erosion and the road concerns that are accessing the 180 acres above. And we expanded that group at a staff level a little bit. At that work session, if you recall, there was some citizens that attended the field trip earlier that year. And the council asked for those two individuals to be on that group. So I can empathize with the Trails Committee because they did see some outside individuals coming in and being a part of that group. And they weren't directly created as a membership into that group. But if you recall, whether that's a right or wrong decision, I don't want to point fingers at it, but it really still was a technical committee. It really still was much of the same staff. And it did allow the two citizens to watch staff at work and debate the issues that were at hand. And we came up with a strategy of trying to manage that piece of property. I've told Mark in our discussions this afternoon, is my impression that it was much a disclosure for them. They're affected residents below. They may have a positive or negative view of what happens with the property, but it was not really expressed from their standpoint. They did focus with the technical concerns with erosion and dust control in any of their comments, but they really just observed. They didn't provide any writing to that group. They really just observed, from my opinion, of what was going on. As we came back to the city council and provided that report, there was a concern on my part of whether we were really ready to move forward with, because the next step in the outline, we were assessment of conditions, we were going to do this ad hoc committee, we kind of replaced it with how do we strategize the management of this property, and then it was to really jump to a master use plan. And again, I think it was about a month and a half or 2 months ago, I came to the council and gave a report on the status of that project and said, I don't feel comfortable at a staff level that we can make a call on exactly whether OHV, because OHV is, from our standpoint, is the most problematic use. It creates the most erosion. It's not very well managed. It doesn't mean that everything's falling apart, but we had to put up that emergency fencing to keep them from going up the hillside and tearing up the hillside. And so that was the most problematic. And at a staff level, you know, our behind-scenes information is the last time the city, and I wasn't employed, but last time the city had let's get rid of the OHV area, it was standing room only. And so I became increasingly uncomfortable that we were ready to make a final call on what should happen with the property. But we are plenty capable of creating a management plan as a precursor to the uses. The question became is how do we get from a management plan to uses on the property? And what I explained to the council in that meeting is that I envisioned that we would probably approach it much like we do with our emergency management. Our emergency management plan identifies different areas during an emergency that different departments and staff and city administration and the council. And when something happens with that, each has an assignment to take place. And that seemed like a great management format. Rather than reinvent the wheel, modify the emergency management plan and turn it over to the management of the property. And now say, who's in charge of taking it from this point and moving forward? And the purpose of the management plan at that point was to say, here's some goals and here's some aims, and then it would have the tasks. And the task would be, here's the values, go out and vet out the issue. So we had to take some positions on the uses. We couldn't say, stay neutral, we don't know about the uses, but fix all the water that's running off the hill. We had to look at the property from that global perspective, that you've got multiple uses going on and multiple interests. You know, should the gun range stay or go? But there's problems with the gun range. Should the OHV stay or go? There's problems with it though. And we have the same thing with trails, and we have the same thing with mountain bike. And now I know that there's a feeling of miscommunication. From my perspective, I've only taken the information, and I'm willing to go through that information, everything from when the Trails Committee met with the Planning Commission and presented what their vision of that trail system was, to the effort that the Fruit Heights plan produced that they have recommended the city go to. I've looked at all that information. And so we had to take a position on what kind of uses and what kind of problems that they pose. And so from our standpoint, this management plan is a step between the strategy of how do we handle this property to the final outcome of uses. And we're assigning different departments or entities to vet out what happens with the property. And so that's kind of how we're arriving to here. Now with the Trails Committee in particular and communication, I'm a little taken back, to be honest with you, not offensive to them as individuals either. But the email sent in November told them this specifically. I have an email, it was sent to Bruce Cox and asked him to send it out to the committee in November. And it outlined that we were going to come up with this plan, and then we would create an ad hoc committee to vet out that management plan, and that they would be invited to participate into that process. But precursor to that, it was giving them an opportunity to weigh in. And there were a number of items listed in that email in November for them to address. I did receive, that was about November 14th, I think is the date, about February 12th. I started receiving communications from the Trails Committee and then eventually the Parks Committee. And from my review of the information, they did not take advantage of the opportunity to address the larger pictures that were being asked and did push for the trail that they were hoping to create. But I did not include and take in, I was not provided the other information about the trails. Maybe that's a fault that we created in this process. But we didn't look at it, that they were vetting out the mountain bike trail and that this was an immediate public demand. What we vetted out to is that there are problems with the property and we need to be careful about moving forward. So in the plan, you know, I'm a little taken back again. It doesn't say that the mountain bike course is prohibited. If you read the actual language, it doesn't say it's prohibited. It does say there's a concern, and that concern needs to be addressed. And it does take the position that it shouldn't be a regional facility. That is partly driven by staff in the global view of the multiple uses going on there. If the OHV went away and we vetted out that that doesn't belong, it would change the nature of what we're doing with the property. If the gun range is gone, it changes the nature of the outcome of the property. We're balancing various uses with it. But it did go in and take a position in draft form that because we have problems with erosion, because we have problems with access, because we have problems with parking, we need to be cautious about moving forward with the facility. And a regional facility, given the constraints of the property, do not seem feasible. Was that done in a vacuum? No, because at the work session at the Planning Commission, the Trails Committee represented that there was no intention of making this a competition course. It doesn't mean it's not a skills course, because when I looked at the farming or the Fruit Heights, it's like going to the ski resort. You have an easy, an intermediate, and a black diamond. They also want a pump course that the city's not funding, and they're also the city's funding the construction of a parking lot. Those were kind of the things that I expected in answers from when we sent out to the individuals so we can play into it. So I'm trying to address the other part for George mentioned is it's not done in a vacuum. It's done from a different perspective. Now I can understand a group that is volunteers in a committee that they don't necessarily have all the resources, they don't have necessarily all the expertise to vet it all out, and they have a strong desire. But I still see that we open the door for consideration of a course without being a regional nature. If we have to go to regional nature, which can be vetted out, then we have a different way we need to approach how much money and which uses are coming and going and how much expenditures. Because staff looked at it, that there's not enough money to go around. We could just spend all of your money for the next 10 years in erosion control. And I don't think that's your goal. So we have to create these different balances. So the purpose of this management plan is to set up the different assignments, and then this ad hoc committee, the one that was envisioned earlier, come together and vet out the findings, because all these findings are coming from the previous data and meetings and conversations. They're not grabbed out of thin air. And now we can sit down and vet out. If the language is interpreted to prevent all mountain biking, we need to vet that out. If the language is prohibiting a course, they can vet that out. But I don't see that it's prohibiting, it's just given a cautionary tale to move forward. And I would like to see the Trails Committee in their grant, if that moves forward, because I'm neutral. If this course happens, great. If it doesn't happen, it's fine. I don't have an agenda being pushed. I'm just trying to be a tool to help the city wrap its arms around the property. But I would expect the Trails Committee to come to that as a membership, bring their data, their information, outlining that how are we going to, let's collaborate. How are we going to get parking? How are we going to get the access? You know, I've heard the solutions in the past discussions. Well, the mountain bikers can park north and south at other trailheads. But I also heard at the Planning Commission meeting that this is a practice course for high schoolers. I don't think the high schoolers necessarily follow the longest route to the place. So we have to collaborate together with everybody to talk about how are we constructing the road, how are we creating parking, how are we creating that funding, and how do we move forward. And you know, if we go to the elimination of OHVs on the property, we'll have more space to figure that out. But if we're competing with the trucks and the trailers and the OHV vehicles on a weekend that they also want an informal course race onto it at the bike park or a 4th of July or whatever we're thinking about, the infrastructure needs to be addressed. And that's really what this management plan is trying to portray. So the move forward is to create an ad hoc committee. We've recommended somebody from the Trails Committee, somebody from the Parks Committee, additional staff, and citizens, if we want to invite them to be a part of it, to go through that document, to vet it out and see how well it goes. They're offended. I see their offense, but it's no different from my standpoint that when a staff creates a zoning ordinance, we draft it up, we take it to people, we have the hearings, and we vet it out. And to me, it's not trying to make an enemy of anybody. Somebody's got to take a position, and it can't be, well, you guys decide what to do with the OHV. We had to identify the problems and the concerns with the infrastructure. So I'm just expecting tonight that you let me know who you want on the committee. Let's go invite them, and we'll facilitate sitting down at the meetings, and I can put up a couple of pillows and we can arm wrestle about mountain bikes during that discussion.
So this is a draft management plan. What you're suggesting the process going forward, if you look at your summary, is a committee an ad hoc committee consisting of about 8 to 10 individuals.
That's usually easy to work with.
You've listed some of those that we may have. I think the heartburn they may have had is, and unless I missed something in the plan, I didn't see any other activity where you listed that something was not desirable. Did you list, like for anything else?
On the committee, not desirable?
No, in the report.
Yeah, in your report, it said that the mountain bikes course is not desirable. I couldn't see hiking, walking, OHV, that we actually took a position on.
It was
some.
even stronger
It was
language
even
than
stronger.
against the OHV, which is such a higher erosion and other issue problem. So that, I think that's one of the things that took me aback. But
Yeah,
we don't need to dive
No.
into
Yeah,
the
we don't,
language.
and because this is a draft and we can
Exactly.
get a
That's what we
committee.
want the committee to fix.
Yes.
Yeah, this is
fix
for
that.
multiple eyes to go in. We have to draft something, because if we walk into a meeting without something to react to, we're not
Sure.
getting something done.
Sure.
And so,
But
you
I
know,
can understand the position that
I-
it seemed
I-
like there was maybe a little bit of a political assuming in the way it was written. But that's okay, we're just going to move forward.
Well, there's a political assuming, but part of that political assuming is that it was driven by discussions that were made directly to other entities. And so we just took that information and plugged it in, that this is a really low course issue, and that it should be done on a limited basis. To expand further, we didn't hear information to expand further, and staff is saying, look, we've got a problem with the OHV. Expanding further should be tentative.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have any other neighboring communities who any longer allow OHV use up on their
Our
private
view of
hills.
it is that
We're the only one left.
yeah, well, Davis County master plan shows the Bountiful B, so they have OHV. Davis County master plan for the foothills shows a Centerville connection to that. That's on the current county plan for that connection. So we have to have some discussion about OHV.
Yeah.
And if OHV use stays, we need to have discussion with the county, because the registration fees for Davis County machines, we need to ask the county where that money's going and what's happening to it.
Right.
But I didn't want to go in there in the management plan and say, the county, we need to ask the county that, because it's still open whether OHV should stay or go.
Right. Well, to move us forward on this, I would just say that a couple of things that I heard was, if we're going to place residents on the committee, that gets a little bit touchy, because what residents and what perspective are they bringing, right? And so then, are we going to grow the committee too big if we do that? So should we just slash the residents out, or, try to get a couple more additional residents for a balance?
Our position to you with the technical staff is we weren't ready for residents.
Yeah.
That was something the council wanted to put forward.
So the question
From my
Well,
standpoint,
and can I just say, that was in an effort to help the mountain bike, because we knew that would be the strongest opponent, and that if they were allowed to see the process from the beginning, there would be less resistance to the mountain bike trail.
yeah, that may be the case to it. But the issue for me, for residents in general, I think that's your next step. When the committee ad hocs and comes with a final recommendation, a draft to you, the next step is how do you want to put a notice out? Do you want to hold public comment on it? Do you want to have an open house? Do you want to have hearings on it? And that's, this is not a zoning general plan process. This is a fluid, undefined, how do we engage the public? So I can appreciate miscommunication and misunderstandings, but I also think the staff tried to make good faith effort in informing everybody and keeping them, and we have the emails that disclosed this process to everybody. And that's really my important point is that staff didn't do anything in a vacuum.
I think that, for me, the most important goal moving forward would be to ensure that the people who have put in those hundreds of hours of work and have the information, that they're at the table. That's the only thing I care about, is to make sure they are at the table. So to that point, if you end up being worried about the size of the committee, I think it would be more beneficial to have 2 Trails Committee members at least, instead of a Trails and a Parks. I sit on the Parks Committee, and I don't think there's a Parks Committee member who would claim that they feel like they would have more to add than a second Trails Committee member who's already spent a ton of time studying this out. So that's one possible
Yeah, my
suggestion.
comment is you do what you want with the committee. I don't have a problem with it, but the reason the Parks Committee is there is because if you're going to assign the Parks and Recreation Department for managing OHV, the maintenance, the enforcement, you need that representation.
So I want to say, I don't fault you for a draft. The biggest problem is getting an initial authorship, and then people can tear it apart or build it up or whatever.
Correct.
So I don't have a problem with that. Going forward, I think we have to have balanced evangelism, because we're talking about OHV. We have a very sizable OHV dealer in town, and we're talking as if they're whether or not they're allowed. I don't know if anyone's reached out to that owner and said, hey, are you interested? How many of your customers you sell really high-end machines. I don't see a lot of high-end machines up there. Are your customers even interested in continuing the use of that? Because
they're up there.
Yeah, there's some of them, but I haven't seen it. I see a lot of, when I'm up there, I see the high school kids on the burned out, KSL 250 or the 250 they bought off of KSL that shouldn't be up there anyway because it's leaking and blowing. It's got blown seals and all that stuff. I don't see at least in my experience, I haven't seen a lot of the high-end machines up there on a regular basis. But I would like to see. We've got a pretty significant investment that's been made by a business owner. I'd like to see them get some representation as well, just so we balance all the evangelism. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have evangelism. I just want to make sure we balance it out so that we end up with equal voices on there.
Well, at one point in time, Corey, didn't you and I have a discussion, and you were going to reach out to them to see if they could provide a person who would provide input, and did that happen?
Chief Childs reached out to them. They said they would participate, but there wasn't any overwhelming.
But they didn't come
We're excited,
forward.
yeah.
Okay.
But again, that goes back to when I approached you a month and a half, 2 months ago, is look, we're really not in a position to finalize. This really needs to be vetted out through other processes. And you're right, it may come strong on the mountain bike issue, but staff's view of the mountain bike issue is to add complexity to the problems, we're hesitant.
Well, I respect that, and I understand that, but at the same point in time, that's what got this started. So I don't think that's a question that's really open to discussion, because that's part of it. I don't know if there've been
Right, and that's
actual
why
commitments
they're
made,
invited to participate, bring their data, bring their arguments, collaborate with everybody of the interest group, and talk about parking and talk about access
Yeah.
and how that's funded and how we're providing it.
We
if
do
these
have
multiple groups.
We do have, and I've had a number of people reach out to me from both the off-road vehicles users and from the gun club about, and I'm kind of shocked at the negatives on the gun club, because we haven't particularly heard them before, but people saying, hey, while you're doing this, we're not going to lose the gun club, are we?
Right.
And I at least am supportive of not losing the gun club. So I would, I totally agree with doing what you're doing. I think there ought to be someone from each of the interested parties. I think there ought to be someone, given at least the opportunity, from the equestrian community.
That's a good idea.
You do see them up there, yes.
And as far as residents, I don't have any problem with residents. I think it needs to probably be limited to one resident, not a Mr. and Mrs. They don't need extra representation as opposed to everybody else.
There's a natural override there anyway, so you'll need one, right?
Okay,
I wasn't going
fair.
either way. I was just saying one will be dominant.
Fair enough.
But only one resident maybe doesn't accomplish that goal that George stated of balanced evangelism.
No, that's true, but multiple residents, but not from the same family.
Right, there you go.
So what I'm seeing on the recommendation and how the council, you modified it, is maybe 2 Trails Committee representatives, possibly drop the Park Committee representative, have a gun club representative, an OHV interest representative, and an equestrian representative, and maybe or maybe not residents. Is that fair to say?
Well, there should also be somebody who walks up there on a regular basis. Because that's a user group. as well.
I would say that that's a really valid point, and maybe in if we invite residents, one of your other residents, but as a runner, that's how I use the hills, I would say I wouldn't be overly concerned if I wasn't represented, because it seems to me that that is the one use that is prioritized as the #1 priority. Because that passive use, we know it's the highest use through survey and just observation, and we know that it's the least detrimental use. And so, to me, respecting that use was clear in this document and is such a given that I don't know if I worry about that.
But if it's high priority, I think we should have somebody on there that's a hiker. And I think 2 from our Trails Committee, because they put a lot of work into it.
Yeah,
I'm great with 2 from the Trails Committee.
I would want the Parks Committee on there, though.
We'll send a hiker runner then it will double.
Sure.
Yeah, that could be, and
So when
And
you
I've also suggested strategic staff who are in charge of these assignments. They need to
So,
have
yeah,
a
you've
stake
got-
into the process.
right.
Yeah.
At this point, I think we're commenting on the list that you've got, and nobody's questioning those.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you need the staff that you've already looked
Okay.
at.
So if you drop, I'm just trying to calculate numbers here. If you drop the residents, you have 4, you have runner, equestrian, OHV, gun club, city council, parks, 2 trails, city staff and street maintenance, and city staff and drainage. That gives us 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, you just passed the effective limit.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if you really wanted 11, we could do it, but when you have 20 people, it's really hard.
Yeah, I would think 10
I-
to 12 would
Yeah,
be.
I
good.
do still think, because I live in that area, that you will end up with a better product and less resistance if you have one of the residents on it.
Yeah.
That's a strategic call. I see the
That is
merits of
my-
it. But we've
I-
also had some folks disappointed with that call.
Well, I think if we've got 2 Trails Committee to balance it out, I think it's going to help the Trails Committee to have a resident that lives in that area, so we don't decide this great big thing, they've put all this time in, you've put all this time in, and then all of a sudden we've got the residents coming in and doing the same thing that the Trails Committee is doing and going, you did this in a vacuum. So I think if we have a resident or 2 on there that is, as open-minded as we can get and has maybe some knowledge or skills in the area, they're going to talk with the neighbors so that all of a sudden we don't have the same thing.
I think it's
that
a
we've
good
got
idea,
now.
but let's maybe have the Marshes or someone with similar sentiment, one of that representation, and then maybe someone who's more neutral or open to the idea from the neighborhood as well.
I agree with that.
Yeah, so that there can be that communication that spreads to the neighbors with all the
Yeah,
different
that's
points
what I
of
think, it
view.
would be good to get the communication out there so we don't get
And-
wrong information out to the neighbors.
And you have 2 to 4 residents potentially with your selected user groups, with your,
Right, I think that you can get some
Right.
people who represent multiple views at the same point in time, so, not that I'm trying to put Tammy on the committee, but if she's up there and runs up there, then she can represent both a community user and the runner walker, okay, so.
But I think they're speaking particularly to the Island View neighborhood who
Yeah,
feels like
yeah.
they'll be most
Fair-
affected.
Because they'll be the ones the most
But I think we
impacted.
could find a biker or a rider
And
or
I
a
don't
runner up
disagree with
there.
your point that if they're involved in the process from the beginning, if we can get buy-in, that it's been a
Right.
thorough
Makes a
process, that
huge
we've
difference.
considered all the issues, then that does help with the end result.
so that'd create 11.
I'm comfortable with that. I think that seems good. As long as I think 2 representatives from the Island View neighborhood, but a more balanced.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and that'll be the tough part, is
That'd be
we'll need
12
your
if you had
help
2 from
on
that neighborhood.
suggested individuals, because I can go through the phone book, but I know what happens.
Sure, of course.
Okay.
I'll work on that for you.
Just to be clear, does somebody want to make a motion or at least list who you have?
What's your final list again?
If you have 2 residents from up in that area, we're at 12.
Okay, so you've got the 7 that are here, plus,
You've added a runner, an equestrian, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1 additional Trails Committee member.
Let me say one last thing. I see Mark raising his hand. I want to.
2 issues.
Go.
You need to come up here so you get on camera.
Well, and not to complicate this, but part of the reason you're bringing everybody together is because you're looking at maybe scarce resources and potential conflicts. And certainly those discussions have to happen, but I think there's actually less. We recognize the gun club use was there, the OHV use is there. We don't particularly see a conflict with that, and I'm not sure they see a conflict with us. And so just as we go through the meetings, Corey, there may be times where everybody can be invited, but you have significant issues to hammer out on the OHV where we may not be able to give much in terms of input. And so I'm not suggesting we need to complicate this with a bunch of subgroups and so forth, but there's a lot to work out with OHV specifically where it's not going to affect the mountain bikers.
But I think that's why it would be
But
good for
that's
you to
where
be
the other
there.
eyes really helps.
To say that. I mean, if he's just meeting with the OHVs, then he's getting their side of it, and you're not going, but look, this trail, this is how we plan on this trail, so it's not going to affect
Definitely, we need some
you.
consolidated meetings for sure. It just depends on how deep you're going to get into some of those different issues. The other thing I just would say, and I'm not asking to be on the committee. I'm glad to be on the committee if that's what you'd like. I'm a resident. I'm not a Trails Committee member. Just to be
I was
clear.
just
So-
when I saw him raise his hand, I remembered that I just didn't even know, but found out he had resigned. And I don't know if there's anyone else who is as knowledgeable on what's been put in so far. And so I think Mark should sit on the committee if he's willing. I think that would really be important. So,
To me, we can't go too deep or we'll spend another year.
yeah.
But we do need to, the goal was by midsummer to have something. And so, yeah, you're right. There'll be individuals that are more interested in OHV and they're going to hear about drainage. But we need to collaborate as a group because from my perspective, is that I know there's a frustration with me, but I can't support a trail use absent of access and parking
Sure, of
that's going to
course,
compete
yeah.
with other interests. And to me, to date, and all the information submitted to me, that infrastructure has not been adequately addressed.
Sure.
And so I have to take the position of, it's a limited nature for now, let's go vet it out.
So
I
should we
agree
have
with you.
one Trails Committee and Mark, so that we can have Mark on it?
I would
That would-
submit
that would work.
that the chairman of the Trails Committee ought to be one, and that the Trails Committee post the second one. Nothing against Mark, but I'd say it ought to be coming from the Trails Committee.
That's true, that's true, that would be great.
So let's assume for now that we've got a constituted body that we're looking to do for this ad hoc committee. We don't have it on the schedule tonight, but in order for this group to become effective, go through all their group dynamics and get to a result, that's a pretty short window.
That's a really short window, and we will have to discuss with the group their timing and when we think the group can accomplish the task. So it may have to come later. I mean, part of this was driven by the deadline for grant, and we just
Right,
we
we've
just didn't
missed
hit
that.
it. We just
And
didn't
it
hit it.
might end up being for the best because, like you say, there are these other issues that are going to cost money, and I don't know what kind of grant money is available, but maybe we can, be submitting for a more comprehensive ask than.
Well, we should have learned from what we experienced last meeting with the park, that rushing down the road a little bit too fast
Yeah.
meant that we probably missed $200,000 to $300,000 of grant money that could have been used for Island View.
Or if,
So-
no, I would disagree with that because if we, as a Parks Committee, we talked in depth about how big our ask should be, because if we ask too big, it might be too much of the pie and they might just say no. So I think we asked just the right amount to
Yeah,
get.
but the ask was 50% of what we were gonna do, and our costs are $400,000 higher than we thought they were.
And I think some of that detailed work of funding will come with the assignment to complete the management task,
So,
rather than this group trying to figure out how to fund it all. Let's just get everybody together, stakeholders. What do we agree with use of the property? It may not come about because we may not have the funds for it. But we can certainly put it on a goal plan, and then each entity can come back in and make their arguments, because drainage and utility is going to have to come back with their drainage and utility capital improvements fund and try to address how that's going to be funded. Early, to my knowledge and background, we're talking 3 years to apply for grant money. So we've already had discussions with federal money for the grants that will fund the engineering at 100%. Drainage and flooding, they'll fund at 100%, and they'll fund up to 75%. We'll do the EA for the recreation 100%, and we'll fund the recreation at 75% if it's improved on the plan. But to get through the process, 3 years. So I think some of the funding and strategies to accomplish a task are going to be the horizon of the vision of the plan. It may take 10 years to do this. And I think that's some of the vetting with the Trails Committee. If drainage, if the group agrees as a whole, that the staff does, I'm not saying they do, but if the staff is that first basic service infrastructure in some type needs to be put in place. If it takes us 3 years to do that, that may be the time frame for all the other implementations. I'm not saying that's it. I'm aware of how long it takes to get things done. And I have concerns about the expectations of the outcome competing against a whole lot of other interests that need to be get done first, or conjunction with. So it may take some time for some of these ideas to come about.
Well, you're probably going to end up with some hybrid between what is considered adequate servicing for all the multiple uses up there.
Right.
I don't know that you're going to get a brand-new gleaming parking lot in there with, chains and handicap parking and ADA ramps before you start using the hillside for more uses.
Right, and I think that's where the group comes to you and says, here's where we think we need to get at minimums.
But I would say on the flip side is I've heard compelling arguments from staff, from Randy, as far as there is a minimum bar that needs to be hit, and we're not there yet. At least that's my representation of what I've heard so far.
Yeah, because we're still debating whether it should be asphalt, curb, and gutter, or an all-weather surface road at a staff level. Me and Randy still arm wrestle over that. And you saw what language ended up in the draft.
Sure, and so that's what I'm saying. I think there's definitely some room in there.
Well,
so let's get a motion on this ad hoc committee. I think we came to a consensus, didn't we?
Do you want me to summarize what I've heard? Sure. So item number 1, city staff, could be 1 or 2 people if you want drainage and the city engineer. You could probably just bring the city engineer as needed. So drainage, and then the second one, you'll have someone from Public Works and the Streets Department. Then you're gonna have 2 Trails Committee representatives. No Parks Committee representative?
Keeping the parks.
No, we are.
Keeping the Parks representative, okay, another one.
And we're having one Trails Committee, and then they're going to pick one more person.
Oh, that doesn't have to be a committee member?
It doesn't have to be a committee member.
We'll let the chair use his judgment on that.
Two slots
Two
allocated
slots.
to the
Two
Trails
slots.
Committee.
For that
Okay.
focus on trails. Yeah.
And then a city council representative, one lucky person here, and 2 Island View residents, 1 favorable, 1 neutral, something like that, balanced. And then 4 select user interest groups, which would be the gun club, OHV, equestrian, hiker/runner.
Correct.
And then you're still gonna need community development and,
We're facilitating it.
okay, facilitating. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
So you got 12, don't you?
12 to
That's what I have.
13.
It's a good size, because
Okay.
at every meeting, a couple people don't come, and unfortunately.
Yeah, if you know we're talking about pipe size down into Dual Creek Channel, I assume that some will just say, I'll come to the next meeting.
well, the new tree committee, Mayor, what have we got, 9?
The what?
The tree committee?
7.
Tree
7
board.
residents.
7 plus.
Well,
But you
then
do
plus
have-
you've got staff and the other, so.
You have you as a liaison, you have a staff member, then a couple staff members, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
You're not voting.
that's workable and it's productive and there have been assignments made, so I think that makes sense. I would make a motion that we bring into existence an ad hoc committee to help us refine the management planning for the 180 acres on the hillside to hopefully facilitate all of the activities that residents will want, as constituted, as outlined by Lisa just a moment ago, to be 12 to 13 people.
Sounds good.
I'll second
Second.
it.
The motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Do you want to
You can
do
pick
it
the
now, or
second.
you want to do sidewalk?
Now, I guess I'd have
Thank
a
you.
second item, and what I would suggest, Mayor, is that we get something on the website.
Are
Letting
you-
people know that we're looking for people for those positions. Now, some of them, Gun Club, aren't gonna come from the or the, Trails Committee aren't gonna come from the website. So, you know, if there are people who would like to put themselves forward, then they can do that, either from the resident or from one of the other uses.
Just wondering about the practicality of that.
Yeah.
We gotta come up
It
with
might
them
be-
somehow.
It might be easier for us to reach out than for us to
I
hope
think
that
key
they.
Well, I would
people
think-
in the communities will be able to
Okay.
find a good representative.
So are you saying that, and Corey, you need to remain engaged here for a minute? Because you're probably wondering, Corey, how am I going to select some of these people, right? Or how are
Well,
they?
we asked earlier, and they've, you know, the ones that we've assigned to departments were fine. We know the Trails Committee's got 2 slots. We'll wait for the assignment of them. We'll have to contact the other department head for the Parks Committee and who would volunteer for that. It's the public at large. I'm not sure about Island Park interests or the Gun Club or the OHV.
Call the OHV business owner and ask for a name. Call a gun club person and ask for a name.
That's right.
I could find a hiker runner, absolutely.
I will get the Gun Club.
And,
I can do the
Call-
OHV.
like, what about equestrian?
Call Spence Packer, one of his
I can-
group that
I
rides
can do that.
horses, and get a name there.
Yeah, I know some horse riders, so Stephanie and I could work on that together.
The only one I'm fuzzy on is the for and against in Island View. I'm not sure what we're for and against
I'm not.
necessarily.
I don't think we
I'm
need.
not fuzzy.
Okay.
Okay.
I can pick you a resident on
Either side of the issue.
slightly either side of the fence.
Okay.
Neutral and concerned.
Both fairly neutral, but both sides.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And you're going to provide those then to Corey?
Yes.
Okay.
By when? Do we have a deadline?
Hopefully.
End of the month.
What's your anticipation
week.
for the first meeting of this group?
It's going to take us about 3 weeks to get everybody understand and scheduling for first meeting. So it's going to take us a month to get to the first meeting. I would anticipate just to get them together and then explain the assignments, give them the information, and then ask them to set some scheduling time for subject matters. And so you're right in the sense of, you know, July might be too quick. So about a month to really kick something underway.
So names due within a week?
That'd be fine.
That should work.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. Hey, I want to thank Corey, you, and everybody in the city for all the hard work. You put in a lot of times. It's outside of probably your job duties and responsibilities and definition. I want to thank the Trails Committee for all the hard work and time they've put in as well, too. It's been, people are passionate, but because you all have put in so much time, and it's so meaningful to you, and hopefully this is something that we can move forward with, that everybody's satisfied for the going forward. So thank you, all of you. I failed to recognize that Jamie's assisting us tonight, filling in. We usually have Katie, and we're grateful to have you here, Jamie. So let's move to item number 5, the sidewalk replacement project. Steve, do you want to address this?
Yes, and I'll try to address it expeditiously, but I don't want to forego any opportunity if you have questions about specifics. But I put in the packet, in the staff report, a summary, what happened last fall, what's happened since then. Bottom line is that we did put together a package of work last fall of approximately $20,000 of work for those who responded to the invitation to cost share. We had a contractor on the Hook already, who had been doing work for the city at some unit prices agreed upon as needed throughout the city. So that contractor was to do the work. Weather got in the way. It was postponed till this year. The work's been underway and is about done, or maybe done. That's scope of work, right, Mark? Yes. Okay. And then the understand.
That was $20,000?
That's about $20,000. And then we put together, I think with the council's knowledge, a bigger package for this spring. And it would be conditions that did not involve the removal of trees. And so that's the package we've got in front of you tonight. 71,000, let's see, the bid amount is,
Any place between about 50 and 106, I think, 57 and 106.
well, yeah, we had several bidders.
We've got a targeted that was about.
We have several bidders, and if you looked at the city engineer's recommendation, it was not to go with the low bidder because we did reference checks. Mark did those. Our street supervisor, Mark Marchant, is here. He called all the references that were provided, and none of them had experience with this company doing cement work, only demolition of concrete work. Is that correct, Mark? And we had, this is
Mark, pop up here.
Come on up, Mark. And so,
We know how much you like to be in front of us all.
so this is,
Famous, it's YouTube.
It's so posterity can hear you.
and we've got many, many locations throughout the city in this bid package. There'll be many, many citizens to get their impressions from this project, and we want to make sure that the work is quality. And so the recommendation is to go with the second lowest bidder, which is the same one that we used on the small-scale project. But we had, what, 4 bidders or 5 bidders? So
5, I think.
5 bidders. So the recommendation is to go with the second low bidder. Any questions?
Not on that.
Okay.
I do have a couple of questions, but not on that. In fact, I'd make a motion to approve the bid as recommended by staff for the I think it's $71,000 and change.
$71,884 to JMR Construction.
Yes.
I'll take that change.
We have a motion, and we have a second?
A second.
Okay, roll call vote, or less further discussion, sorry. Councilman McEwen?
Aye.
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 Did we go backwards?
So
Sorry.
that's 5-0, that passes. You have
I did have one more
on
question,
something else.
Steve. A couple of more details. The matching program that we sent the letters out on, that the response was poor on, do you have a number of how many people responded back?
Mark
We
might.
had 30 people respond back.
30 out of how many letters?
185,
185 letters?
yes.
And so the 30 did it or didn't? Did we do all of those 30?
We are 3/4 of the way through. We've got 10 spots left.
And were those all the 100%, would you say?
We had 7 residents that we done some cost sharing with,
Okay.
but
So, I mean, that's about what I would expect, really.
Only 7, though.
I guess other,
7, yes.
Okay.
how many 100% offers did we have in that 185?
There's the 30 that responded.
So pretty much everyone who got a 100% offer letter took advantage.
Yes.
That's exactly what I would expect.
Something's not making
right?
sense. I thought you said we only had 7.
Yeah, I'm not
No.
following.
No,
7
7
that we
cost
cost
sharing.
Yes.
But
7
anyone
that are
who
cost
got a
sharing.
letter who recognized this is going to be covered 100%, they contacted and took
Okay,
advantage.
all right.
Yeah.
So out of 185, then 37
Yeah.
got something done on.
No, 30.
30.
And of those 30, 7 of the 30 also had some cost share conditions.
Yes,
In
some
other
of them
spots.
had some that they paid 100% for that was cosmetic or something else they wanted done, why our contractor was there, or we cost shared with them at 50%.
Great. Last thing I want to say is thank you to Steve, because I think several of us got an email from a somewhat vocal resident about this, and I was one of them that asked some of the specific questions. I can now answer him. Thank you.
And let me note, because this is of interest to, this is a priority for the council, that between the 20,000 or so spent in the smaller scope and this 71,000 plus some engineering, oversight, we'll be spending that $100,000. Now, the $100,000 isn't all in the transportation fund. There's, I don't remember the exact amount, about $70,000 in the transportation fund, but we have 2 line items in the street department budget in the general fund that would take that up to $100,000 or more.
I thought it was 150.
No.
100.
George, was it 100?
Well, I thought that was adding in, because we didn't use it all last, I thought we were looking at it as we had a portion we weren't using and we were throwing in to make 150 total, and maybe I misunderstood that.
Well, we took the understanding 100,000 was our target.
Yes.
Well,
Because I was looking at it as 100,000 per calendar year.
I thought it was 150 last year. I misunderstood.
Well, bottom line is we have a
And what's the transportation fund?
transportation fund is also your street.
No, what's the amount?
1.4
Okay,
million.
so you are correct, Steve, because the conversation was, I suggested, as I do every year, that we allocate 5 to 10% of the transportation fund as an active transportation committed amount of money. And the conversation was, okay, we will allocate 5% and we'll say it's for sidewalks, which is active transportation. So the 5% number matches the 70 and change plus the
General
20
fund.
that comes from the streets department. So
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't ever remember 150,000 being the directive.
I obviously was remembering wrong.
Well, that's what I was remembering as well, because what I was trying to look at was when we talked about how we got back to our insurance carrier, or otherwise what our plan was. We were saying we had about 500,000, I'm rounding down, but we had about 500,000 if we accomplished 150,000, and this year we were X percentage done with mitigation of like the overall problem. So that's why I had the 150 number in my head as well, Bill, so.
Well, come budget time, if you want to bump that up.
We'll take another 50.
But the 50 may come from streets too, and you got more streets that have needs.
We won't take another
I think, no, I mean from the amount that would be left for annual street contracts.
Right.
yeah, he gets
That's
it.
why he said no.
He changed his mind
It's
real
always
quick.
a push-pull, right? There's tension there.
So,
We
yeah,
cut the end off that candle and it didn't get glued back on the other end, is that what you're saying?
That's right.
I mean, the 100,000 is significant. That is a significant statement, and I think would mean a lot if you had to show that you were making a serious effort towards
Well,
this problem.
especially, I'm presuming we'll do something similar this year.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that we may want to try communicate, because we're looking at it as a dollar amount in linear feet. I'm wondering if there's another measurement that we should be giving back to the residents that makes more sense to them in terms of like number of concrete squares replaced or something that's.
Square feet?
Well, even square footage, I mean, because you can look at it and say, oh, I've got like,
How about
10
how about number of faults fixed?
yeah, faults fixed would be a good one, because we already have that number is how many total, so how many of
That's
the
right.
major, minor.
Yeah, we have the major and minor, and we
Is
could.
there fix that's updated in our database?
So, yeah, so maybe why don't we ask Mark to report after the completion of this work, along with the smaller scope that is about done, to report back, can be in a memo, an email, on how many of the faults in each category have been corrected. Would that be helpful, council?
I think so, because when we reach the end of the construction season, we can say, we were here last year, we're here, and of course, I think the intent of the council would be is to appropriate some funds to do that again next year, but to let the residents know, the yellow curbs are disappearing, and here's the rate they're disappearing at.
Is this an operational metric?
Yeah, we could add it to
Certainly
the
could be, easily enough.
I think that's a good
Calendar
idea.
year.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Or my replacement can decide whether he wants to do that.
Mayor, I wonder if now would be a good time for a break.
Okay.
Would be
Mark, thank you very much.
No, thank you.
You present very well, and you clean up and look very sharp too, so thanks. Right now, we're at item 5.5 on our
5.5.
agenda, okay? So do we have a motion for 5.5?
What?
We're going to take a quick break.
Oh, okay.
Something wrong with the clock. It's supposed to be 7:35 or 7:50.